Got recording started. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started here in just a few minutes. It's supposed to be nice here in Phoenix this weekend. We actually had rain yesterday in Phoenix. I couldn't believe it.
Is it-
Panelists, you can hear me okay? Yes?
Yes.
Yes,
All
sir.
right. Got it. Looks like we have attendees coming in. So we'll get started. Everyone here in a few minutes. Welcome to the first of 4 of our digital trust webinars. I'll tell you a little bit more about it here in just a second. I think a few more folks might be coming in. We are recording this webinar series, and after we finish each one of these, each one of our panelists will be able to send the information out, kind of like the way you joined, right? You got information from each one of the experts from around the world, and they'll share the link that you might be able to go back and take a look. Because I know it's an hour and a half, and not everybody can stay with us for an hour and a half. But when we were talking about putting this together, it was interesting because we thought, well, let's just do an hour. And when you start hearing some of the experts on these panels talk, you know that an hour sometimes just isn't enough. So we want to make it an hour and a half, and you can go out and take a look at the recording anytime you'd like. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about the background of this. My name is Mark Thomas. I'll be your moderator for this. But what we wanted to do is really kind of explore this whole landscape of this thing called digital trust and bring together some of the global top experts on this topic. And not only are the experts in digital trust, but also they have a specialty as well: cybersecurity, privacy, compliance, and those types of areas. But I'm also very proud to say this, that every one of the professionals that you'll see in these next 4 webinars, not only are they my colleagues, but they're personal friends of mine. So what you're about to hear is a typical kind of conversation. If we were all just sitting in a call, we wanted to make sure that we could share that for you. Okay. And not every one of the folks that you see on this page here will be in every one of the webinars. You might want to be able to look at each one of them. We'll talk about these in a second, and pick the one that might have your favorite speaker, so that you might be able to have a conversation with them and ask them any questions. Now, a couple months ago, I reached out to these friends, said, hey, let's put this series together. It's an unsponsored event, so this is not a single organization that's sponsoring this. These are all professionals here to share knowledge with you. So you won't get any sales pitch emails after that. If you want to stay in touch with any of them, any of us, out on the registration page has all the information on everyone's contact information. Okay. Well, as luck would have it, they're all qualified to talk about this. So this highly talented group, right, is going to go through 4 webinars on this. So we're here in the first one. We'll talk about this obviously in just a little bit. We thought we'd kick this whole thing off. Whoop, not that yet. I wanted to go back and I wanted to use my pen. Anyway, my pen's changing my slides, not putting ink on the screen. But we wanted to go back. I'll just jump back for you here real quick. The way these are designed is this first one is to talk digital trust. What is this thing? Right? Why should we even care? Is it a big deal or not? And then we're going to jump next week on next Thursday. We'll talk about the laws, frameworks, standards, and a lot of things out there. You can bet that we'll probably talk about the digital trust ecosystem framework. Many of us here on these panels were part of the kind of creation of this, as well as other areas in the digital trust world. We'll go into our third webinar where we talk. This is fun because a lot of people say, well, what's the difference between digital trust and cybersecurity? What's the difference between digital trust and zero trust, right? So we want to get into kind of that link between that. And then finally, the fourth webinar should be fun for a lot of folks. We're talking emerging technology. Everywhere you look, not only do you see digital trust, but you also see AI, you see all these other emerging technologies. And we're going to link a lot of these, not just the current emerging technologies, but what some of these pros think the future is going to bring us in terms of technology and what we should be thinking about from digital trust. Okay. All right. Let's move on here. So that's what we're talking about today. Got that one. I already messed that up and pushed that too early. So our panel for today, as I mentioned to you, Mark Thomas is my name. I'm coming to you from Phoenix, Arizona. I will be the moderator for the panel. And also, if they let me, maybe I'll also try to get a couple of my own comments in there as well. We've got Bjorn Watney. Bjorn is up in Norway. Are you home today, Bjorn?
Actually, I am not. I'm currently in the Seychelles, so I'm in the middle of the Indian Ocean.
Always on the road. Always on the road. Thanks for joining us. We have Shannon Donahue coming to us from Chicago, Illinois, U.S. Next, we got Arsalan Ayub coming to us from Bahrain. We have, you know what? I'm going to get this right. I know tall guy, but it's Kizaloma. Yes? Got it right. I know I did. I know I
Perfect,
did.
perfect.
Coming to us from the West Coast of the United States. And then we have Gustavo Gale. Right? I got that right. Didn't I, Gustavo? All right. Coming to us from Sao Paulo, Brazil. All right. So those are the panelists for today. A couple things before we get started. Let's just tell you a little bit about what you can expect during this. Now, this is a discussion. This is going to kind of seem like they set up a Q&A, but this is really more of a discussion. I will say this, that every one of the panelists have seen the questions that I'm going to ask, right? But there are no scripts coming at you during this entire session. We do have a Q&A section at the end if we have time. I will keep an eye on the Q&A. So if you orient yourself to the Zoom session, there's a Q&A piece. If you have a question, what I would like for you to do is, if it's for a specific panelist, put their name in the question. That way we kind of know who to send that to, or if it's a general question, that's fine as well. If we cannot get to all the questions, you always have those panelists, their personal information. You can send it to them personally. Okay? We might not get to all of them. An hour and a half goes fast, so I'm trying to make this as quick as possible. And as I mentioned before, we are recording this webinar, and you'll see several of us sharing the links to that afterwards. Usually, it takes Zoom a few hours for us to for the recording to be available. So you probably will start seeing that this afternoon. Okay. All right, enough for that. I think it's time for us to get rolling here. And I thought this would make a lot of sense to start off here. All right, to talk just about what this thing called digital trust is. And I like this. Tall guy sent me this cartoon yesterday, and I love it, right? Because it says, hey, can you trust us? But we're going to tell you you're failing. All right. So when you think about digital trust, I'll admit it. You know, I've done a lot of posts on LinkedIn, everyone here, and I've seen a lot out on X and so on. There's a lot of chatter about this thing called digital trust, right? And everybody here is associated with digital trust. So I think it's relevant for us to kick off this first question here to discuss what this actually is. Tall guy, you sent this cartoon to me, right? I think we're gonna start with you. What is this thing called digital trust, and why should I even care?
Well, Mark, first of all, thank you for coordinating this global event, leading this event. I think it's very timely. So just to jump onto the topic, I think we should talk about trust first, right? It's trust in the physical world. It's a condition enabling two or more parties to make decisions with a certain level of confidence. We rely on that character, the ability, the strength, or truth of something. Now, add that the digital context that we live in, right? Everything we do now is all in the digital context, right? So it just becomes an extension of that definition. And we again, back to the cartoon, you have security, privacy, ethical use, ethics, compliance, all those things, right? The transparency, accountability. So when you add all those things, I think in the world of digital life that we live in, the digital trust is the confidence in the integrity of the relationships, the interactions that we have, and transactions we do among providers, consumers. It's an associated digital ecosystem, right? Of course, it's that ability of, we talk about people, process, technology, organizations, and technology create that and maintain the trustworthy digital world. So it's that all collection of all these things that we talk. So it's really, I think the integrity aspect is very important. But again, it's really the digital elements of those things that we do: relationships, interactions, and transactions. I'm going to emphasize. Thank you.
I like that. And I saw a lot of heads nodding out there as you were talking. Anyone have some additions to that, or maybe some challenges to what Tall Guy's saying?
I do. I think I'm not going to challenge you, Tolga, but I agree with your definition. I think it's really important to talk about how fleeting trust is and how important it is in relationships with partners and consumers and employees, because it is something that takes a very long time to build, but it can be wiped away really quickly, right? So it is almost, it's not something that you can necessarily just describe on paper, right? It is an emotion. And how do people get to feeling that they're trusting an organization that they're gonna either give their data to or give their money to, and know that they're going to get their expected result back? I think it is really important to build the practices around the around digital trust that we're going to talk about, to make sure that people can be confident, which will lead to trust, and continue to maintain that. Otherwise, you have to start all over again.
You know, actually a really good point. You said it. It's hard to earn it, and it's easy to lose it. You know, we always say, oh, you know, we have all these, hey, great job, great job, great job, but then one uh-oh might completely change somebody's attitude about that, right? And we see that a lot. And of course it depends on the uh-oh. But there may be some people that have such blind trust for an organization because they like their brand, right? And I can say that I've received several emails from several organizations where there has been some compromise, but I like how they responded to me and I like how they handled it. Yeah, so I think that's pretty interesting. So that kind of goes to that whole idea. In fact, when Tolga was talking about the definition, I hope you all don't mind. I threw actually a definition in here of digital trust that's from ISACA actually, and a couple things that we heard as Toga was talking about this. Here's what I want to just ask you. I have a question on this a little bit later on, but it says interactions and transactions. Um, do you think digital trust is just about a financial transaction, or could somebody lose trust in some interaction, right? Even though we have digital trust, what's the connection between those?
I think, Mark, that we don't limit ourselves to financial statements here. You can lose trust, like in a wrongful ESG report, for instance,
Hmm.
that companies are saying they are doing something and they are not. So I think that trust boils down to you have the ability to believe that company is doing what is right, the right thing to do, even when you're not looking at them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that integrity piece, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And as we're starting to grow too, we'll talk. Well, I have a comment later on supply chains. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But I also like in this definition. Again, there's a lot of different definitions out there, but I happen to like this one. Notice it also says among providers and consumers, and I think this is pretty important to kind of note this out because that doesn't say business and customer, right? Because I think a lot of people think about digital trust is this financial transaction. You all kind of shook your head no. But I think that this could be any type and size of organization. It could be a religious organization. It could be a political organization, non-government, government, so on. So I think that's kind of a big thing there from the transaction perspective.
Yeah, Mark, I wanted to chip in on that because I think it's any form of online activity really. So it's as once you're digital or online and there's an activity with an exchange of information in any way,
Mhm.
this would be applicable. And coming from a cybersecurity background, then going into privacy with a GDPR, I think we're moving on to ethics, for example, ethical AI adoption. We're moving on to transparency, being able to see what the company is doing with their data, those kind of things. So these are add-on elements to cybersecurity that typically will come into the digital trust domain. And yeah, anything online related, I think would encompass by this.
Go ahead, Shannon.
I think Bjorn's right. And I think, sometimes people don't even realize that they're getting into an online transaction, right? They may just be interacting with somebody at an organization, pick any of the types that you just described, Mark, and then data's being held, or they're collecting information about people who are coming to the organization. I think, you're asking if it's just digital transactions. I don't think it is, right? Once the person loses trust in the organization, things can fall apart completely. That means that we have to have good practices across the whole organization, whether it's HR, whether it's marketing, whether it's finance or IT. We have to be making sure that everything that we're delivering to any type of consumer is reliable and that they can trust that they're getting what they expect. I think, we are living right now in a huge age of skepticism, right? I think I had been reading some reports. Somebody had put out a new digital trust index, and they're talking
Yes, I saw that on LinkedIn. Yes.
and they were talking about how I think that the trust in social media and in news media was at a all-time low of like 3%, right? But it's not just that you don't know if you can believe what you're reading. It's that
Mhm.
you don't know how much information they're collecting on you. How is the AI working behind the scenes? Are you talking to a bot? How is the information being handled on the back end? And so there's all these different things that are contributing to how you feel about who you're interacting with.
Mm.
It's very important again, and I do, I know I kind of beat the dead horse on this, but once that's burned, it's very hard to bring something like that back.
And there may be some people that you may not have to burn them. They may never trust you from the start. You might have heard me tell the story about my mother, right? I had to settle up my mother's estate last year, and as it turns out, my mother had no credit cards. My mother did not do anything digitally as far as I knew. If she needed cash, she was a Wells Fargo banker. If she needed cash, she would go to the teller, write a check, and get cash. She wouldn't go to an ATM. She just, for her, she's was at the bottom of that spectrum that said, I don't even want an identity. And then she called me one day, this is several years ago, and she said, I just got a note from this credit reporting agency saying my information's been compromised. You all know what we're talking about. And she said, why did they have digital information about me? I never gave them that approval. You know what I mean? So, and I said, well, mom, sometimes it's not necessarily, you sometimes you can't pick the organization and what they're collecting about you, but she was in a digital world, but she didn't trust any of that stuff. And my mom she would have never done digital banking. Where me, for example, or maybe one of you all, right? We may say, hey, bank, give me more, give me more. I may trust you. So interesting on that. I kind of like that perspective.
Mark, so as you guys were talking, I just hit me, there's this intentional and unintentional aspect of it. So think about the person, like in the real world, the trust.
Yeah.
Someone might be really a good person, right? They don't harm people. They're always with the good intentions, right? A good human being. So we say, oh yeah, we trust that person. But that doesn't necessarily mean that person can easily be manipulated, right? Misled, those type of things, and based on our interaction. Same thing I think goes for on the digital aspect too, because the companies may want to do the right things, right? And they try, obviously. We talk about cybersecurity, but it
Mhm.
may not be enough, right? On the other side. So they might also kind of have breaches, incidents, and this and that. So I think that trust element that's why it includes all those things: cyber governance, compliance, risk. It's just not this one piece, right? It's a
Right.
bigger umbrella.
And you're right. Even in this definition, we talk about it's the integrity relationships between providers and consumers. But sometimes, do you think maybe it's I may not trust the technology. I may trust you as a company. I may not trust what's sitting between us. And I think sometimes that has a kind of a key piece there too. Because again, we'll talk about this obviously in webinar 4, AI, those things. I may trust your company, but I may not trust what AI is going to come up with. Right? Yeah.
I think
You
it's
know,
too,
go ahead.
like we are talking here when we talk about the definition. I think we naturally go to what does it take for the consumer to trust the organization, and that's because we're trying to help the organizations improve their digital trust ecosystem. But I think it's interesting when we look at organizations that people do want to transact with digitally, there's not a lot of soft ways to prove that they're doing a good job, right? I mean, I don't know how many, like I doubt your mom was going around and asking for, any kind of SOC 2 reports on anyone she's going to deal with, right? And I think that on the flip side, organizations kind of do put a lot of pressure on the consumer before they'll do business with them. We want credit checks. We put in security controls like that frustrate people, right? Like
Right.
here you have to have these, very, very strong passwords. You have to change them. You have to have MFA. We put in a CAPTCHA to make sure that you're not a robot, and you have to do it 17 times because we didn't believe you the first 3 times. And I think, like, there has to be ways for the organization to prove that they're doing a good job in a softer way than handing over a report. Like, I'm transparency, good communication, good messaging, all of these things. There has to be a way too for the user to be able to prove themselves without using technical controls that are making them frustrated and may lead them to quit the transaction altogether.
Right.
So I think there's work to do kind of holistically there.
I think that, because as you were talking, I was thinking about this as, you mentioned security, you mentioned all these controls we have in place. So it's kind of sounding to me like, and I've said this before, is digital trust is an outcome of a lot of things. It's an outcome of those interactions. It's an outcome of good security. It's an outcome of good privacy, those types of things. So it's not a thing, right? You may not be able to implement digital trust. I don't know that. We'll talk about this here in just a little bit. It's really more of an outcome of the ethics, all the other things we have there. So yeah, interesting. One last piece I just want to share, and then I want to move on and talk about adopting digital trust, or if that's something you do. But when you were talking about the technologies, my son lived in China for some time. He did one of these university professor exchanges where he taught school in English in China. And the only way that I could communicate with my son, now I trust my son, okay? He's a peer of mine. I trust him, but the only way we could communicate was through a messaging app called what was it called?
WeChat.
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 That's what it was. Yeah, it wasn't WhatsApp. It wasn't, Facebook message. It was a app that he said, Dad, just so you know, right? This is probably not the most secure tool, the most secured way that we can communicate. And you should probably know that anything that we say could be monitored. And so I trusted my son. It's just that technology between us, I didn't trust. Now, I'm not saying anything about any administration that owns that technology, how that works, but I didn't trust the tech. It was interesting. Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. So go in.
Mark, I'd like to
Go ahead.
before you move on to the next one, I'd say like a lot of times we interchange digital trust with confidence. It's not what it is. So yeah, you might be confident about the services that you're providing to your consumers, but there are other interactions that are taking place. So it's not just two parties that are interacting, one of the service provider and the consumer. There is a lot more which is a part of your ecosystem. So those relationships have to be taken care of for. And I think in the DTF framework, ISACA has put them in a very nice fashion altogether.
No, I think it's a good plug-in for the DTAF. And as everybody knows, we're not jumping into the DTAF in this. We'll talk about it a little bit more tomorrow. But right now, I will say, Arsalan, and you probably know this too, and everybody does it. Right now, the World Economic Forum has a framework. I think it's very high level. A lot of consulting firms have their proprietary frameworks. I think from a publicly available perspective, I think the DTEF's probably one of the better ones I've seen out there, and I am biased towards that because I had a little bit to do with kind of the creation of that. But Shannon, before I move on, I have a question for you. This definition of digital trust, how many days did it take for an entire group of professionals to agree on that definition?
I mean, it took a while. I think we're going back here to like like December or November of 2021 when we started talking about this. And I know we were in that room for a good 3 days, just
In 3 days before we
so
finally.
good when we finished this. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was a very robust discussion. I mean, you can see we've been
Yep.
talking here for 20 minutes about a definition that we've already established and put out, right? And still trying to explain it and add to it. And I think the fact that it changes, that the technology landscape changes, that the global, governmental landscape is changing every single day.
Yep.
That this is going to constantly evolve.
Yep. It's funny. It's just so everybody knows. That's why I love this definition, because every single word in this definition was argued over for 3 days to make sure it was the right approach. This is why, Arsalan, I'm glad you kind of brought that piece up about the DTEF, and Tolgai, when you described digital trust, you pretty much paraphrased this entire one, which I really enjoyed, and thank you all for that. So, all right, so let's jump into another subject here real quick. All right. So there are a lot of folks that say, you guys are just talking, right? Yeah, but, right? And a lot of people say, prove it to me. Well, you know what? Am I going to try to prove to you that having trust in the relationships that you have with people is a benefit to you? So I want to jump onto this. Shannon, I know you were kind of hot on coming out of that, the definition and doing this, but there's a lot of questions about the benefits of this. I'd like to keep rolling with you for a little bit, because I know that the ISACA organization association has done a lot around this. Could you summarize, or could you point us to any places we may be able to look at that might help us say, okay, why do we do this?
Yep, 100%. I think, we talk about digital trust a lot, and it isn't actually like one of the specific disciplines that it kind of encompasses, right? You don't necessarily have like specific technology KPIs or KRIs to look at here. You have to bring different domains together and kind of look at it holistically. People aren't always sure that they can say, here is the benefit directly attributable to digital trust. But we have been talking about this for a while, and we've done several digital trust surveys, right? We are seeing clear benefit. And when I go and compare the results of the ISACA surveys to the ones from McKinsey or PwC or, whoever is doing one at the moment, the benefits are consistent. So when you start looking at different groups of survey respondents and you see consistency across the results, I think it becomes pretty believable. The last survey we did, I think we released it last May, so 2024, we had about just shy of 6,000 people who responded. And the leading benefit.
Evet, iş yapmaya duralım aşkım. Olur bir tane.
Yeah, so the leading benefits. Do you want me to hang on here?
No, we had somebody not on mute, so I think I muted them out. There you go.
Got it. Okay, so I think we had some leading benefits that were pretty clearly in front. So I think about 70%, just a little bit higher than that, really indicated that having strong digital trust practices would positively impact the organization's reputation, right? More than half felt like digital trust led to better decision making because they had better data internally. Also, they reported having fewer privacy breaches. And then, some lower numbers, but not low numbers, right? Also expressed benefit of customer loyalty. Again, not having to rebuild relationships because of incidents or bad communication or anything like that. Increased revenue, this is a big one, and faster innovation, and again, fewer cyber incidents. So fewer privacy and fewer cyber incidents is certainly a good thing. Helps the organization build those trust. But when you can start to see things like, oh, our reputation is trending, we are increasing our revenue, we're improving our efficiency and able to innovate quicker and bring product to market faster, those are all very good benefits that when somebody's looking to implement digital trust, they can use those as topics of conversation with the executive team, because they're not going in with a necessarily an IT threat and saying, here's this need. They're showing business impact to the organization, and benefit by implementing practices. I think, there's also great benefits to consumers, right? And when you build these practices in, and you can see things like fewer service interruptions for them, or better user experiences, or the faster ability to complete transactions, all of these things, bring attitudes up, make people happier, and then they're more willing to continue to do business with you. So lots of things are positive.
I hope you don't mind me doing this, but as you were talking, I wanted to bring up for anybody who's not aware, this is a part of that digital trust report that Shannon was talking about. And it's kind of some data here, but anybody should go out and take a look at this. This is the 2024 report. Shannon, I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask when the next report comes out, but this is pretty current, and there's some real good information in there. So I would say that one area to look at to say, okay, all right, what are benefits? They do talk about that in that report. I do want to bring out another document, Shannon, that I won't bring it up on this, but it's the board briefing on digital trust that I've read. It's pretty succinct. It does have some very high level good business benefits of taking a look at it. So I want to kind of throw that out there as well for anybody looking at those. Hey, let's open up to anybody else. Does that make sense? Are you seeing something other than some of the things Shannon was saying, or support those things when someone says, what's the big deal? How do you explain the benefit of digital trust?
I have one point actually that there's risk.
I think there might be some internet connectivity issues, or is it just me?
True.
I thought it was me freezing up. I think, Bjorn, if you can hear me, you just froze up.
For example.
There we go. We got you back now.
Yep. Yeah. No, I would say that not addressing it weakens the entire digital ecosystem. So if you are one bank and you're doing really poor at gaining the confidence and trust of your customers, it will impact also other banks operating in the digital domain, because it weakens sort of the general population's trust to the ecosystem. So I think it's like a common responsibility, not just to look for the benefits, but to strengthen the system.
Yeah.
No, Mark, I'll just sum it up. I know we have a time issue, but I think, this is how we create value. We talk about, value, delivery, benefits, realization, risk optimization of use of resources, limited resources, compliance, right? That's how we create value. I mean, if you just kind of the big picture, right? Through digital trust, we create value.
Yeah, and we do definitely have several other questions to hit, but just my summary of this too is just tell you a real quick story. My CEO, I was a CIO of a very large managed service provider, and this is a CEO who loved to slap his hand on the table for effect, and he slaps his hand on the table and he says, why are we losing customers? We're secured, we protect privacy, and we're passing our audits. Why are customers leaving us? And we figured it out. They no longer trusted us, right? They were, what is the old saying? Yeah, we're killing them with 1,000 paper cuts and small little incidents, horrible communication, no relationship management. They lost trust in us and they were leaving, right? So we talk about the benefits, right? If you're a for-profit company, it comes down to finance, comes to customer, comes to revenue. If you're an organization or association, it comes down to their kind of that net promoter score. So do you recommend this to anyone else? So we've got some global folks here, right? And I know that digital trust, like some people say, hey, this thing is taking off. Some people say it's kind of decreasing. So Bjorn, I want to start with you, right? Out in Norway, because I know that I've done a significant amount of work in your region. And I know that a lot of your IT organizations and businesses are very forward thinking when it comes to a lot of customer centric service management types of things as well. So what are you seeing right now globally? And again, you don't have to stick it just to Norway because you probably travel just as much as anybody on any of these panels. So you see this. What are you seeing right now globally? Going up, going down? What do you think?
No, definitely. I see a decline, and I can just start with myself. I'm starting to lose trust in a lot of the things that I read.
Yeah.
And there are several reasons for that. Obviously, do you have nation states trying to affect political decisions, swaying public's opinions? You have the increased uptake of AI. We just had a case running in media these days in Norway where some government function had used artificial intelligence to create a report that said we need to shut down a few elementary schools. And this report was actually referring to sources that does not exist, to books by authors that haven't been written. So when these cases occur, when you read about them in the media, you read about big breaches, data being lost, what does it do to you as a consumer and a citizen in the digital domain? You start to lose your trust. And I think Shannon was mentioning it as well, and you as well. I think the Thales report, the Digital Trust Index, that media and news are now down to like 3 or 4% of the respondents trust that industry, which is alarming. And also the ISACA State of Digital Trust report, I think it was about 50% of the companies that felt that they were digital trustworthy. And it's interesting to see that this is what they say. And at the same time, it's only 20% of them that plan on increasing the budget to build more trust.
Right.
So are we lagging behind on this? Definitely. And again, you mentioned, I had just one more point there because you mentioned the WeChat. Yes, it's a Chinese app. It's an app that does everything for you. You can book an appointment with a doctor, you can do your online banking, you can order taxis, food, chat, or whatever. But there is another trust barometer that I've used many years, Edelman. Every year they make a trust barometer for different industries. And it was interesting to see artificial intelligence, for example, AI, and look at China versus the US. So in China, about 72% of the respondents trusted AI implementation and adoption, while in the US, only 32% did the same. So that is obviously a geographical, cultural thing as well. But yeah, too long didn't read. I would say that the trust in digital services and products are decreasing globally, but I'm happy to see that there are initiatives like we're doing right now to sort of push it back on track, which is in essence the same thing as GDPR was when it came out, because there was a cool down amongst citizens of sharing data with public services, for example, because they were not sure about how it was managed. So then the regulatory requirements came to sort of start to build back that trust. But it's an ongoing battle, to choose that word. So it's definitely something that needs addressing.
Yeah.
I'll stop it there. I could go on.
No, it's totally fine. Anybody have some additions to that one?
I'd like to chime in over here on the Edelman's Trust Barometer specifically. Beyond you're very right. I'd just like to say the report has been called as the Edelman Trust Barometer 2025 Global Report Trust and the Crisis of Grievance. So if you go back to 2019, the report from Edelman actually showed that the brands are actually being more trusted than the governments of these. I mean, and technology giants are being more trusted all over. And what we've seen is there's a shift again, and the shift actually happened in I think close to 2021. Businesses were the most trusted according to the Edelman report. 2022, there was a crisis. 2023, we see that this has increased, and 2025, we are in a trust and crisis grievance. I mean, um, not just the employers and employee has a mistrust gap increasing, brands having mistrust along with governments. I was looking at the older reports. China had a lot of trust with its citizens, which no longer exists in 2025. So regardless of the adoption of AI and technology, there's a lot that's going around. So I think globally, we are in a place where a lot of heads need to put together some strategies to make sure that the trust is regained either in the public or the private sector.
You know, it's a good point because I think about this. It's always a moving scale. Think about Facebook, right? Years ago, put my trust into Facebook, and then certain events happen, my trust comes down. Then my trust goes up a little bit. Then my trust goes back down. Then my trust comes up and it goes back down. And a lot of it depends on kind of the news and the branding. I kind of like the idea when you talk about branding here too. Actually, I was reading a report. It was the top trusted brands in the world. You know the number one top trusted brand is? Band-Aid, the company that makes the band. They're the top
Band-Aid.
trusted guy. It's not because of their digital capabilities, just they're the top trusted brand. And you look at companies like Apple, who used to be high on the list and now not even on the top 10 anymore. Right now, Microsoft has actually moved up right on the trust list. But again, there's a lot of different ways of taking a look at that. But I kind of think about that whole branding idea, and I told you my story about my hotel a little bit ago. Well, I actually might not have. Well, I'll probably share that with you here in just a few minutes. So, all right.
Just
Anybody have anything on this one? Yeah, let's hear. Where
yeah,
do we
just one here.
Yeah.
I think that something that I haven't seen any reports yet is that the expectation of the consumer, of the party, of what is trust or is the bare minimum level of trust we expect is increasing. And we're not capturing that. We're trying to measure trust in like an absolute way, but the baseline is ever growing because we're seeing all the efforts that companies are doing with cybersecurity, with everything. But my personal expected trust is higher and higher every time.
Mhm.
I
Yeah, you
think
do.
this is
Your expectations change. Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That
But
makes
I
But
sense.
do they
think
ever go down?
But Bjorn brought up a good point about that, right, Gustavo? So if your expectation is changing and these organizations are sitting here, I think, Bjorn, you said half of them said that they believe that they're digital trustworthy. Um, but none of them are measuring it, right? So we're relying on somebody else, Edelman or this ISACA survey or something to report what the trust feelings are. What are those organizations themselves doing to measure how well they're doing in their own practices across the organization, and then how their customers are feeling about it? I mean, you could go and you could take like NPS scores or potentially customer satisfaction scores. But right now, there's not that barometer that you're talking about that actually will measure what is this, right? Yet half of them think they're doing well. And then consumers are like, yeah, sorry, you're not doing well, right? I think we do need to find a better way to bring together, what is obviously I work at ISACA, right? So I'm going to say, we talk about maturity scores in CMMI or in COBIT, right? What is the practice level score that we have internally that we're saying we're doing reasonably well or exceeding, or and how do you combine that with an external score of how your organizational customers or relationships or third parties view you, to get a true kind of understanding about how the organization is or isn't doing?
Yeah. But there's a lot to that. So as you were telling the story, I was thinking about when I was a kid, right? I'd come home if I brought my report card home and I had a C on my report card, I was excited, right? I was happy. I'm like, Dad, look what I did. I got a C. And my dad would be like, that's my boy. My daughter, she had to get A's. She's like, Dad, I got an A. He's like, that's my girl, right? Because for her, it had to be A, right? So is there again, we got asked about this a few minutes ago. They said, what are some tangible net metrics to linking to this? I think you're right, Shannon. I don't think there's a universal way of saying, here's your report card. Because that report card, if I gave you an A today, it could be an F tomorrow afternoon.
Right.
It could change overnight. It's so fluid, and I think there's a lot of ways to look at that. But if you look at the like you mentioned, and everybody here said, it comes down to this, right? You can protect, you can protect privacy, you can be secured, but you can be compliant, right? But I may not.
I think you just made a good point. You know, you can get A today and can become an F tomorrow, right? So that kind of brings a good point of that persistency. You have to keep doing the right things,
Yeah,
right? It's not a one-time effort. It's
right.
an ongoing effort. Because as long as you're in business, that's what you should be doing, right? That persistency, doing the right things.
And to be
Right.
fair, like the survey reports that we read, they're point in time reports about how people are feeling. This isn't like watching financial markets go up and down all day long, right? So you don't really ever have a constant pulse of how you're doing as an organization. And I do think we do need to identify some way of more consistent information for both the organization as well as its ecosystem around it, so that people have um, some sort of tool to tell them it is okay to lead with confidence and trust here.
Mhm. Man, so many different pieces in that. It comes down to how well you handle incidents. It might come down to I just don't like your CEO, so I don't trust you. Right? It could be that. It could, you see a lot of times where you hear cases where organizations are in a class action lawsuit, and someone says, "Are you going to do business with them? They're in a class action lawsuit." I'm like, yeah, that doesn't bother me. But for another company, right? If they're in a class action, I would be bothered by it. So there's a lot of different things there because, if they're in legal issues, some people automatically assume, oh, they're not trustworthy, right? That's not always the case. If they have a major incident, right? People say, oh, well, we don't trust them anymore. Well, you know what? We've all had incidents. It comes down to how you handle it. So I do like that. Yeah, good. Okay, we want to move on a little bit because I know we have about 45 minutes left, and I know we have a few more questions. If you all don't mind, I'm going to jump into this next question because I think we've covered this a little bit, but I want to jump into this a little bit more. Because remember the definition, we said, it's this confidence in our relationships and talked about interactions and transactions. Okay, so I'll kind of kick this off with my story about Marriott. And people always, I'm a Marriott fan. Again, I'm not advertising Marriott. I'm just telling you I'm a Marriott fan. Okay. I have been part of several Marriott issues or breaches. Okay. And I get an email from Marriott that says, hey, your information's been compromised, but here's what we're doing for you. Here's what we want to offer you, and so on. Okay. Now, it's happened in a couple of cases. Marriott has also been fined under the GDPR, right? They've had some issues. But I've had colleagues and friends that at the first sign of distress, boom, they said, I'll never go to Marriott again. Here I am, 3 issues later. I got 3 emails that said, yep, you've been compromised. I still go to Marriott. Why is it that you know what? Marriott could do and have another breach and my credit card could get, and I probably will still trust Marriott. It may be a little bit about brand. I don't know. But why is it that I trust Marriott when Gustavo says, I'm never going to Marriott. I'm a Hilton guy, right? What I don't know what that is. I'm just making that up. So with me, it wasn't about a transaction. With me and Marriott, it's all about the interactions. I liked how they interacted with me, right? And I trust them because of that. My son, I'll tell one more, and then I'll stop and let you guys walk through on this. Holiday Inn. Holiday Inn is another example. My son, about a year and a half ago, he sends me a message. He's like, "Hey, Dad, let's go get a suite at Caesars in Las Vegas." This was literally 1 week after the Las Vegas breach that took place. And I said, no way, man. I am not. He's like, hey, but think about this, Dad. He said, we can get a suite that used to go for $800 a night. We can get it for $110. I'm like, wait a minute, what? hey, you know what? I may be willing to do that. 5 minutes ago, I didn't trust them. Now all of a sudden, I might trust them because there's a cost benefit analysis to me, right? I'm willing to have my private information possibly exposed because I can get a suite for you know, 10 cents on the dollar for this one. So I wanted to open it up and kind of see if anybody would like to talk a little bit about interactions versus transactions. Does that have anything to do with how your customers, your users, your consumers trust you?
Well, I think that I like the way you framed this. I think that when we talk about digital trust, because the digital, we jump straight to tech, like firewalls, encryption, compliance, privacy notice. And of course, that matters. You need to be aware of what are your protections. But at the heart of it, trust is not built by code. I think it's built by people. I think that people is like represent a core value in that. Because how I usually explain, when you say that a company made a decision, and I was talking to you, like you have like your federal tax ID, but the company is like an abstract being, it doesn't make decisions. Who makes decisions? The people working there. Is all the
Yep.
social security numbers inside the company. So when you talk that you trust Marriott, you're saying that Marriott has core values that people who work there enforce that values. Like, they are transparent with you, how they operate. They're accountable, saying we mess up, something wrong happened. They show empathy. They show that they are doing something proactive. And I know that we got lost for that, but I feel that Marriott has like a humane approach for that. It's not about the perfect tech. It's like acting like a good human throughout the tech.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
There's so many things out there. Has anybody here ever ridden in a Waymo or a driverless car? So we have
No.
them all over Phoenix. And matter of fact, at the ISACA conference here in Phoenix last year, North America conference, I was with some colleagues from ISACA, and we were going to go out and have a dinner and have a couple drinks. And so we go out to Uber. I trust Uber, right? But Uber gave me an option to do something called Waymo, and Waymo is a driverless car. Okay, and I asked everybody, what do you think, right? And people said, well, we trust Waymo, but we're not quite sure we trust a driverless car, right? So there's so many things, and this kind of goes back to that thing. But this wasn't about the interaction. We were not concerned about our privacy. We were not concerned about my credit card getting compromised. We were concerned about the interaction between us and a driverless car, right? And maybe our health and safety on that. So it was interesting. So you think about, you got that. You've got things like the doorbells these days, right? Every doorbell pretty much has a camera. Do I trust that, right? Or do I not want you to see my face? And so there's a lot of things that aren't just interactions. And I think that's where a lot of organizations kind of only focus on digital transactions, right? And I think it makes sense what you just said, Gustavo. It's there's some interactions involved there. What are y'all seeing in terms of interactions versus transactions, or should we move on?
I have one input, if I may, because well, the transactions is one thing, but I think the corporate governance as a whole is also very important. How is the company conducting themselves? How is it being governed? That builds trust. If you have a solid governance model that you can rely on and that is transparent, what more, that it's ethical, that the company is operating in an ethical manner, and also the saving the planet, that the company is operating green, the social impact. All these things will also depend, or the outcome of the digital trust or the overall trust, I think, in the company. So definitely not just the security, privacy, integrity, but governance, ethics, all these things as well.
Actually, go ahead, Shannon.
I think they're all really important contributors that you just mentioned, Bjorn. I think they might not all matter to everybody, but you're going to have different audiences where something really matters to, right? Like your investors and shareholders may care very, very much about your corporate governance, right? They may care very much about your cybersecurity practices. Your consumers may not care as much about your corporate governance and may care more about your ethics and your ability to be operating in a green environment and your communication style with them. And I think that's why, I see a lot of reports where people, organizations, consulting organizations mainly are interchanging digital trust with cybersecurity, right? And to me, they're just very different because of what you just highlighted. There are so many different tenets that could be a trigger for somebody to trust or to not trust. So I don't think it's just about the digital interaction or one singular transaction. Mark, you're talking about Marriott. Part of that has to be that you like the hotel itself. When you go there, your experience is really nice, right?
Mhm.
And then you're going to do some sort of like mental calculation about if you switch over to Hyatt, how many breaches have they had? Probably the same amount, right? So you're kind of darned if you do and darned if you don't. You might as well go to the hotel you like. I think
Right.
there's, so many different contributing factors here.
I think so, and kind of on the heels of the Marriott story, that was I trust them because I like the interactions.
Yeah.
To give you another story, a couple years ago, there was a major breach at a U.S. retailer, one of the largest U.S. retailers, and it had to do with a third-party issue. You guys might remember the Target breach, right? I got compromised in the Target breach. I get an email from Target, your credit card has been compromised, right? The same kind of thing, right? Do you all think I still go to Target? Do I still trust Target? Actually, no. No, actually, I don't. It was
Really?
a transaction. So it was interesting is Marriott has compromised me at least 3, maybe 4 times. Target compromised me once. I don't go back to Target. It was a transaction that I didn't trust anymore with them. And on top of that, it was the interaction. I don't think they treated me very well. I don't think they cared. Right. In fact, the interesting thing on Target was, this is the Target breach, although it was a couple years ago, the Target breach kind of pushed this whole third party risk thing. And I want to talk about supply chain with you all here in a few minutes because it's not. And Shannon is famous for saying it's not just third party, it's fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh and eighth party that you got to worry about. But I don't trust Target anymore. My credit card has not been used in Target since that breach. Right. It's really weird how that comes because it's the way they communicated, and I was compromised, and they didn't offer me a whole lot after that. So it was kind of interesting on that. So, okay, any follow-ups on this one? We'll move on. All right, I think the next question we've hit just a little bit because we did talk about is it growing, is it waning? You see across geographic boundaries, you see some things picking up, some things slowing down. So if I may be in Africa, they may be, oh yeah, well we're not seeing it a whole lot here. In Europe, we may be seeing it. South America, we may be seeing it. What are you all seeing right now? Are there any areas of the globe that are having a tendency to do this? And Bjorn, one of the things you mentioned earlier kind of had that ESG flavor to it, environmental, social, and governance side to it. I would presume, again, I may be wrong here. I would presume we're seeing digital trust maybe getting an uptick in your part of the world just because of the whole support over environmental, social, and governance. Because this, again, if I do something that is not environmentally friendly, may not be digital, but you don't trust me anymore because of that. I don't know. So Bjorn, I'm going to hit you in a second, but I want to start with Arsalan on this out in Bahrain because you may have a perspective on this in a lot of the industries that you're working with today.
Yeah. I think I'll bring in the United Nations e-government survey in play. When we're talking about the countries in the region, the Gulf region, primarily Bahrain, the government actually started digitizing way back in 2007.
Yeah.
And it ranked pretty good in 2003. Globally, it ranked at, I think, about 62 globally. Today, it's ranking at the 5th in Asia and 18th, I think, globally. Fast forward as 2024, that's like 10 years as we speak. it's not just the surveys and the value that we see or the number that we see for the Kingdom of Bahrain or Saudi Arabia or UAE in the Asia continent, because in the e-government surveys, these global surveys, the Gulf countries are part of Asia itself. What's interesting to understand is the digitization of the services was carried off, but I was being part of a couple of these digital transformation activities, some of them noted by Tom Dinar, an SVC card that is an alternate to the dinar itself in Bahrain, a digital wallet. People were really not using these services at all. So there was a lot of push to gain confidence from the people that were involved in strategizing in the government sector as well as in the private sector. So for instance, the e-government authority ensured that it's not just providing a digital service to the consumers. We've got more than 100 entities online in the Bahrain.bh portal. As of today, everything can be done online. It's also as a follow-up as to what the expectations are. So what we've noticed is in this region, expectations have changed, like what we've talked about earlier. They were maybe different 10 years ago. They've evolved as where we stand today. But the good part is the ranking for the region hasn't changed much as it has changed globally. So even though we've seen some trust deficit, but the region really is looking into a lot of investments coming in and a lot of new technologies flying by. So that's in a nutshell as what has been done in Bahrain and in the region for now.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Bjorn, because I brought you up a few minutes ago. What are you seeing out in your part of the world?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, a very interesting question, because when you talk about trust in geographies and industries, it is one thing. For me, digital trust is a little bit the same. The only difference is that we're looking specifically at online interaction. And as you know, I'm Scandinavian, and we have a very high level of trust in our society. So that means there is less need for control because there is an inherent trust. But I've been looking at different industries as well, and I found something very interesting maybe 7 or 8 years ago when I was looking at Edelman, and I was comparing industries, which one is more trustworthy in the eyes of the consumers and which one isn't. And I was doing a presentation those days, and I was asking the audience every time, which industry do you think has the highest level of trust? And most often people would answer bank and finance because they just think that's trustworthy. But that is exactly
Wouldn't get that
the
in the
opposite.
US probably.
Yeah. No. But that is exactly because the opposite of trust is control. And in the bank and finance, you have layers of control. So there is no need for the trust. But the industry that people actually did trust the most was technology at that time. And it also makes sense because see how we have been taking up technology. Everyone installs an app like WeChat. Everyone wants to be on the latest social media. Everyone buys the most advanced TV and put them in the bedroom, and it has a camera, internet connection, and it's maintenance over the air by someone in another country. So the level of trust, 100% in technology. But this was, maybe it was like eight years ago or something. And it is changing because between then and now, there have been so many breaches, there have been so many spectacular incidents, and there has been so many writings in the media that people are starting to lose a little bit of that. You see, they are dropping off Facebook, they are uninstalling WeChat, they are doing these things that they didn't do before. And that means that the landscape is definitely changing around this, and it's an interesting observation to make.
Wow, that's a very insightful answer. You seen anything different in South America right now?
I like the way Bjorn frame it, because the opposite of trust is control. And one way to frame it is like, how many regulations are we seeing around digital trust? Because you don't expect to have a digital trust law in place. That doesn't really make sense. But you have like AI regulations, you have privacy regulations, you have data regulations, you have a set of regulations that help shape an industry. I just saw in a report over here that Brazil ranks fourth on a global consumer index. And I think that report's wrong, because
You say
inside here
ranked
in
fourth? Is that what you said?
ranked
Fourth?
fourth, yeah,
Nice.
Global Consumer International Report.
Very
I'll
cool.
send it here. But inside here, I saw that we have like just an uptick on consumer trust on services, and it was like a very low from 4 months going down. So I believe that each country's culture impacts how we see digital trust, as the expectations we're talking about changes. And there is like a overall trust index with the government. So how the populations feel they are in sync with their government influences how trust is not only felt, but implemented as well. Here in Brazil, we have like a change of political parties in the last presidential election. So we are seeing that pendulum of trust going one way and in the other. I think that it's growing. I see a lot of other South American countries creating regulations around trust, but when trust is mandated, it feels a little bit bitter on the mouth.
It does when you're told thou shalt trust, right? It makes it very
Yeah.
hard to trust, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you on that one. You've given a couple different perspectives. You know, you on the U.S. side, of course, it goes up and down every day, right? Depending on, there are a lot of political pressures here in the U.S. right now, and you all recognize those things. And there's a lot of ups and downs in trust, but there are people who completely will always trust one thing and never walk away from it, right? And I think that's important to understand, that there's different personas there, right? Either you're my mom, who will never stick a credit card in an ATM, or you're me, who will do everything digitally my entire life, right? I'm willing to take those risks. I'm willing to take those risks. Okay. All right. So let's move on a little bit. I think one of the next questions we may have hit a little bit here, but Gustavo, you just finished kind of talking about, what's taking place in Brazil. I want to, if you don't mind taking what you were saying, right, and kind of moving on, because there's a lot of clients I have that say, well, we're so focused on privacy, we're focused on security, we're focused on compliance. And their approach now is saying, we're just going to wait and see how this thing falls out, right? Because, a lot of organizations, when cybersecurity became a big deal, they said, we're going to hold off for a little bit and see what everybody else does. And some were early adopters.
Yeah.
What are you seeing right now, from a digital trust perspective? Because you talk to companies around the world, and are they saying, "Hey, we're jumping on this, or we're going to wait and see what happens"? What do you think?
I think we have both scenarios. As a consultant, as most of us are here, we do have like those late adopters that want to make sure that whatever time they spend on that has a significant return. But I think that since we don't have like a formal ROI of digital trust, how can we measure the direct financial impact of that? And we might need to create that and publish it.
Yeah, Shannon
And
brought that up earlier, right? Exactly.
yeah, Shannon, we might need to create an index for that in Isaka. I think the companies are looking around. So if my competitors are doing that and they are, of course, getting the benefits, why shouldn't I do that? They're not just reducing, that's all we talk here. They're just not reducing risk. They are earning loyalty, building stronger partnerships. I think that companies who can build on that are doing more. And I have a few customers over here, even smaller companies, that are betting on that.
Mm-hmm.
And you saw the whole ESG. I don't know. Don't want to talk a wave, but that changes how people see companies. That changes the expectations of people about companies. That they should the integrity pitch. They are doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
So digital trust can surf on that wave as well.
Yeah. Agreed.
I-
Anybody else? Other perspectives from around the world?
Can I add on? Probably Shannon can elaborate on it as well. But I think this question specifically, we have some very interesting data in the ISACA report from last year. We already talked about companies like about 50% feel that they are digitally trustworthy. But there is another number there as well. With I think it was just above 80% of professionals, they think that digital trust will be more important going forward, more than 80%. And still it goes back to the same that companies, only 20% of them has set aside an increase in budget. So why is it that only half think they're trustworthy? 80% of professionals, they feel that this has got to be big, but only 20% have set aside any budget. I think that's a specific wait and see approach that we can see from those data.
Yeah, that's a good point, because a lot of people say, well, we can't do anything without budget. One of my challenges with a lot of organizations is, what budget do you need, right? What budget do you need? Do you need a budget to hire? And well, we're going to talk about who owns it here in a few minutes. But that's one of the, I think a lot of organizations that can't do it, don't have the budget. We have too many projects. I'm like, what you're doing is shifting your lens from here to here, right? I'm not convinced that it needs a budget, right?
They're citing myriad reasons for delay, right? And I think, they're obviously, Bjorn's right, they're not funding it now. They're also saying they're going to delay funding it, right? So and they're citing all kinds of reasons: staffing, right? Lack of support from leadership, budget. And I think it's important to realize that nobody here is recommending creating a whole new division of digital trust, right?
Right.
Now, there's probably, I don't mean to sound like Doge here, but there's probably a lot of waste going on, right? Because if you have several different departments who are working towards assurance goals or availability goals, and they're not the same goals, that's a problem. And if you have people who are doing redundant work to somebody doing it in a different department, it's a problem. Whereas with digital trust, you could take this and create these, trust objectives, trust goals, and bring people together. You might be, I know what I sound like, but you might be improving efficiency and actually reducing cost to the organization.
No, it actually makes sense, right? There's kind of a negative thing that people can do that because of some of the things taking place in the world right now in the U.S., but no, it does make sense. And that's kind of my whole thing. Is I always think about that is folks always say it's budget. And you know what? Am I going to actually say, well, I can't do that? I know it's the right thing to do, but I can't do it because I'm, but no, it's just changing the lens of how you evaluate what you're doing. Right. And again, I want to hold off on the who owns it for a couple of questions, because I'm really interested in where people want to go with that one. Folks, I have a couple more questions. Do we have any follow-ups on this one? Because I'd like to move forward, if you all don't mind. All right, here's the fun one. I always quote Shannon, right? And Shannon, we're not going to start with you first, but I'm always quoting you. I remember the whole conversation. It's not your third parties. It's your fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh parties you got to worry about sometimes. So there's a lot of vulnerabilities in our digital supply chain. Nobody can deliver a single service without digital suppliers somewhere. Tall guy, give me your thoughts on this one.
Anybody remember about the solar winds, right? So it's our reliance on the third party, fourth party, and so on, right? The for software, for data processing, and other digital services, really. And of course, the potential vulnerabilities grow exponentially as we have more, organizations we have to rely in this whole digital supply chain. So the areas, right, in terms of what that means, the impact. Number one, depending on, just like the operation supply chain management from a physical perspective, the digital aspect is the same concept. We have multiple organizations. That means we have an increased attack surface, right? Each organization having their own issues, potential entry points for cyber attacks. and upstream, downstream, all those things. Lack of visibility, right? We might have limited insight how these organizations that we rely on, upstream, downstream, in the whole supply chain, digital supply chain, that's an issue. The data privacy risk, that's another big one. Sensitive data. We do share data with third parties, they share with fourth parties, and we don't know if that data is being protected adequately, right? Leaks, non-compliance issues, which might eventually cause us operational disruptions, right? A single point in that whole chain is really a big problem. Again, as I mentioned, SolarWinds. And of course, reputational issues, compliance issues, you have to deal with the penalties and such. So how do you deal with that? I mean, you can always say, oh yeah, risk assessment. Someone mentioned your grandmother, right? At the SOC 2. Okay, it's up to a certain point. You can do audits and with their policies. Of course, one very important element is as you onboard, right, with these type of relationships, the contractual agreements. What do you have, the content? Make sure your legal is part of that. And then continuous monitoring. Of course, there are services out there that monitor these, vendors, right? How well they're doing based on their public information, public third-party risk management programs. Data is because everything is about data, right? What do you do to protect that data upstream, downstream, data minimization, encryption, those type of things. But also, I think, as we know, incidents, right, breaches, they will happen. We say it's not a matter of if, but when. But nowadays, it's not that. It's either yeah, when, but how many times, right? You mentioned about the hotel. So we were expecting we're going to go through these breaches for the same vendor multiple times. But at the end of the day, it's really education and training. But the incident response, I think, is very important. You have to have that the playbook and close partnership so that when that happens, how do you work with that vendor and everybody else in that whole supply chain? So that's one I can discuss
Continuity,
obviously.
yeah, that's been a big one as of late. And I always think about this is, you know, I'm a one person LLC. That's me, Mark Thomas. I'm one person company. I could be in your digital supply chain, but I could be 5, 6, 7 degrees away from you. Because I'm a one person LLC in the state of Arizona, I am not under the jurisdiction of GDPR. I am not a publicly traded. The only laws that I need to meet are I need to pay my taxes, right? I don't get audited other than by the IRS. But this one person LLC that's 7 or 8 generations away from you, I may do something to some data that you get that could bring you to your knees, right? And it's really tough to kind of think about. Yeah, there's a lot of things that happen like that. I believe it all falls down to the contract, how you contract with your suppliers and how you convince them to do the same contracting requirements for theirs. Anybody have some thoughts on this? Tall guy, I think that was a really good response to that. I'm sure some of these folks have some answers on that one. Okay. If not, we're totally good because I got 2 more questions. And if everybody's okay with that, we'll just move on. Because I just think this is a big one that I think is really tough. People always say, well, how do we check on our suppliers? Well, it comes in the contract.
Well,
It's
it's
in the
interesting. The contract is interesting, Mark. I think, but it's hard to show other people in that ecosystem that you are. Where is the ability to show that, right? This goes back to, when Rolf wanted to have, stamps saying I am, right? And I think so that you could advertise and participate in a marketplace as a trustworthy provider. I think right now you do have to do quite a bit of due diligence before you can make any of these decisions. And everything that Tolgay said is accurate. These things are going to happen. And everything you said is accurate with the contracts, right? And this is how we provide assurance. But how are we going to let guy 1 in the chain know guy 7 in the chain
Yep.
does have the right practices in place, because you're not sending SOC audits,
Yep.
that far down.
It's truly amazing. And I know we have to move on, but you kind of made me think of that whole ESG thing, the environmental, social, and governance side. Because I may lose trust in a company because I found out that at one of my company parties, we bought a T-shirt, right, from a company that had 4, 5, 6, or 7 degrees away from us, that T-shirt was manufactured by child labor in another nation, right? And I may never use your company again, but you had no idea that this organization, and it's not digital, but it's a digital interaction that takes place on that. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and some people will start using blockchain to show source for that right now.
Yes, you're right.
I think there is a lot we can do, but it is hard to know who is trustworthy in the ecosystem.
Got it. Absolutely. All right. We have 10 minutes left, everyone. Big one. Big one. I'm sure everybody here has been asked this. Who owns it? I have no clue. Bjorn, I'm going to start with you. You probably deal with a lot of clients that are asking you, or a lot of customers, a lot of your suppliers that are asking you the same thing.
No, absolutely. And I was a CISO for 10 years, and I am very used to gaining hats. It's every time there is something new that is a little bit sort of uncertain, and if it angles into security or privacy, it's just put on the CISO. So you get the privacy, you get the business continuity, you get the disaster recovery, and now you get trust. So
it's a catch-all. You throw it at the CISO. The CISO will take care of it. Yeah.
I'm not saying it's well. I would go back and say that it's a shared responsibility within an organization, because it comes down to the trust in the organization as a whole. And it cannot be a single person that's responsible for it. It's like talking about security culture. No, it's talking about security into the company culture.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the same thing. So it has to be a business-wide priority. And it requires collaboration across all the leadership, across all the teams. Frontline employees, of course, very important in your Marriott example. But there are multiple roles that will specifically contribute and specifically be responsible for certain elements and controls in this. And the chief digital officer or chief data officer is one. The CISO is absolutely another one. Mm-hmm. And the CEO, of course, as the face of the company, is a third one. So shared responsibility within the organization, yes, but CDO, CISO, CEO, top of my head, they would have a very bit of skin in the game.
Yep. I agree with that. But if you think about CrowdStrike, to kind of push back a little, CrowdStrike, they lost trust with a lot of people. That CrowdStrike incident was not a cybersecurity related incident. It was operational, right? It was updating. It was release and deployment management, change control, right? Vendor, third party kind of stuff in there too. So I do think this needs to rest somewhere. Whether, like you said, I think it's a business issue, me personally, but I don't know where that owner and Shannon, we have some research on some of our last kind of stuff that says, hey, who should own this? If I remember right, you know what? Let me bring this up, and you might be able to jump in on this. If I remember right, said who owns this? Look over on this. Who basically says the role is critical to digital trust, governance, security, information technology, which kind of comes along with, Bjorn, what you were saying. I mean, this is a close race. Anybody else? Let's open it up. Who owns this, or what do we do? How do we approach this? Because I get asked this all the time.
I get asked it all the time also, and I never have a great answer. Basically, my answer is similar to what Bjorn just articulated, that this is a cross-functional initiative. Obviously, the board of directors has to have overall accountability for digital trust for an organization. Responsibility is a different question. I think it is hard to just put it into security or audit or privacy. I think, at least when I talk about it, get some consensus that somebody responsible for risk has kind of already has extensions across the organization as they're working with every team to identify potential impact. That could be an area. I actually don't think it matters who it is, as long as you have somebody who's willing to really advocate for it, to
Mhm.
streamline your processes, to do the work and have the conversations at the executive level to demonstrate the importance of this.
Uh, So Mark, this is like asking who should CISO report to, right?
That's
I mean, kind
Yeah.
of think about that.
Depends on the culture, right? Yeah, I
It
get it. Yeah.
depends. So the culture, the context, but we all agree, right? It's a business issue, just like anything else. And I think at the business level, we have to have the right mechanisms for your own industry, for your own organization. You have to have that structure. Reporting structures need to exist. But the governance aspect is really, really important.
Yep. Agreed. Agreed. Folks, we're down to about 6 minutes left. Anybody else on ownership, please, because this is a big one. If anybody has any inputs here, jump in on this one, because what I might do is skip the next question because we can put that in the next webinar. All
Take
right.
it as a nugget if you allow, Mark. We said like digital trust is a journey in itself. So let's say if it resides with the technology team or with the CISO or with the data officer, there's more to do being part of a journey once the service is being offered as a digital service to the consumers. So
Right.
it's an ongoing process. It's more of an operational thing. It's not like a goal achieved in one day. It's a process that we have to keep working on. So that's kind of a final thought from my side on who's responsible on this.
Awesome. Good nugget. Good nugget. Gustavo, let's go to you. Give me your 30-second nugget.
Just a 30-second. I saw on the Q&A here, and I want to approach this. Pedro Machado said about Angola, who is a country who has low digital literacy and who is still implementing digital transformation and stuff. And he's asking how can digital trust be implemented there? And overall, I think that countries who are on the way up, ramping up technology, can benefit from digital trust by embedding this in its initial stage. They can build upon digital trust when they're creating things.
Gotcha. Nuggets. Bjorn, go for it.
Yeah, I think that I would go back to what we discussed all the way at the start. That in essence, digital trust is what enables individuals and organizations to engage in online activities. That is I think the consensus that we see, and also that if you don't address digital trust, it doesn't just impact business; it weakens the entire digital ecosystem. So with the whole society becoming digital, is this important, and will it become more important? Absolutely. That would be my my nugget.
You got it. Shannon, nugget from you.
Sure. I think it's important that, whether we're calling it digital trust, the culmination of all of these important practices that organizations are taking, it's not going to go away, right? We have more people working remote. We have people conducting business digitally. They need to rely on safe, secure access to technology. I think that organizations need to be prepared to not only build trust with their customers and partners and their employees, but to also work hard to maintain that trust every day. And I think, they have many choices of who they are going to choose to do business with and interact with. And so ensuring that your organization has a trusted brand is very important.
You got it. Tall guy, on to you.
So, technology, generational differences, right? People like us, we use technology, older folks, I guess. Younger generations, they live technology. So you have to look at it from that perspective, very important. And also, businesses should ask themselves, why are we in the business of whatever the business they are? Like, what is the business purpose? In today's technological environment, I think digital trust is very important answering that question. So to create the value, optimize the value generation. So it is very important going forward. It's a reality out there, and thank you for making this happen, Mark.
Awesome. Everybody, thank you very much. I know we pushed it on this. Thank you very much for all the panelists today. This was a really fun discussion. I appreciate the conversations. For anybody out there that's listening, don't forget, a little bit later on today, we'll be able to publish out on our social media the link for this the full recorded version. If you liked what you heard today, or even if you didn't like it, join us again next week. We're going to do this again next week. We're going to take it a level down. Right? We've hit it at a high level. We're going to start looking at laws, frameworks, standards, bodies of knowledge, where we'll probably talk a little bit more into the detail. Shannon, I hope you can join us for that one, being kind of one of the chief architects of that. But hopefully, if you haven't had a chance to take a look, we got some other superstars out there, just like we did on this webinar. Again, to my esteemed panelists and friends, thank you for joining me today. It was very enlightening. I appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.
All right. You guys have a good day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.